I'm doing this video to emphasize one thing. I would like to emphasize the difference between consumer debt and what is happening with the United States national debt. Consumer debt gets paid exponentially down to zero. Most people don't think about that, but that's the reality of what is going on. Okay? Every payment that gets made includes a principal payment. In other words, at first the loan is being paid down slowly, then ever more quickly as time goes on, and toward the end it's being paid down very rapidly, and ultimately gets paid down to zero, at which point no interest is owed anymore, of course. What's happening with the United States national debt is the exact opposite. When one keeps adding to a loan and adding to a loan and adding to a loan and adding to a loan, etc., the loan amount keeps going up, not down. One does that enough, well, it will start increasing very rapidly until it eventually goes exponentially in the up direction. Okay? And that is basically what's happening to the United States national debt. Now, it's not quite exponential yet. If it were, there would be no point in making this video. Okay? There's still time to deal with it, although not in the way people might want to or might hope to. Okay? That is also a purpose of this video, to provide awareness in that direction. Okay? The point is that if you keep adding to a loan, so the loan amount keeps increasing, first of all, it will eventually go exponential, and part of the reason why is because if you do that enough, the loan will eventually start feeding on itself, it will start compounding on itself, and the United States national debt is actually already doing that for a very long time. Okay? Now, the main thing to bear in mind is that with most exponentials, and part of the point of this video is to point out the unique nature of a debt exponential. Okay? What happens with most exponentials is they go up, they go more or less vertically up, until they run out of steam. Okay? Until they run out of resources to do so. And then they come crashing back down again. A classic example of that was the stock market in the late 1990s. Everybody was saying, hurrah, we're doing so well, look at the stock market go up. I saw that it was going up exponentially, which meant it was not sustainable, it would not hold up, okay? And it went on like that for a couple of years. It was not a small exponential. But I knew that eventually it would turn around again at the rate things were going by sometime in the early 2000s, which is exactly what happened. Once it ran out of buyers, it came crashing back down again. And we also had, that's the last time, we also had significant budget surpluses as well, over 20 years ago. And everyone's saying, hooray, we're finally in the positive again. Will be great. Since the stock market was going exponential, I knew the exponential would not last, therefore the surpluses would not last, because things would go more negative again once the stock market came back down again. And sure enough, we were back into national budget deficits again, into United States budget deficits again, and even on a rather large basis on a monthly basis, and have been pretty much ever since, including February of this year, which had a deficit of more than $200 billion for the month, as noted in a previous video. Okay, that's more or less been typical for the way things have been going lately, last few years, and is probably going to be pretty typical of the future as well. Okay, except for those years, except for those months that have, you know, massive tax revenues in them every few months, where it'll be less than that. But the majority of the months will be big deficits in the future as well. That's just the way it is. It's just the way things are going. There's not really a whole lot that can be done about that anymore, because the economy is pretty dependent on that deficit spending in the meantime. Anyway, the point is that the deficits went way up, which helped contribute to the exponential, the national debt exponential as well, the debt exponential. And the key thing is about a debt exponential is it doesn't stop going up when it runs out of juice, because it doesn't run out of juice. It's the very nature of a debt exponential. It's the one kind that doesn't stop just simply because it runs out of juice. Because the nature of a debt exponential is such that you simply keep owing more and more debt if you're adding more and more to the loan balance, if you're adding more and more to the debt balance. So it just keeps going. The only thing that finally stops it, meaning it typically goes higher than other exponentials do, the only thing that finally stops it is when it becomes apparent that the debt is so big that realistically speaking there is no way to pay that debt off anymore, and so it becomes apparent that the debt is not worth nearly as much as one thought it was, and at that point demand for the debt goes away and the debt crashes. Okay? We're not really far away from that happening anymore, because the key thing is that any exponential to actually go exponential has to go through the knee of the exponential. Okay? Now, on a consumer debt, it happens toward the end of the exponential in any exponential, but in a consumer exponential, it's on the way down, which means once you're past the knee of the exponential, you're paying off the debt very rapidly, and you're getting close to the time where you won't have a loan anymore, and you're down to zero and won't owe any interest anymore. Okay? But on a debt that's increasing, like the United States national debt, this knee of the exponential is going to happen in the opposite direction. And in fact, in our case, as far as I can tell, it has already happened, which is part of the reason for this video. Okay? And also the timing of this video. Okay? That's the reason why I want to put special emphasis on this situation per what I stated at the beginning of the video. Okay? In other words, it's also toward the end, but in this case it's a very large exponential. It's been building for decades. Okay, once it gets past the knee, it's pretty much impossible to stop the progression anymore, because the debt is then feeding on itself so thoroughly that there's no way to stop it anymore. Okay, now if you look at the overall graph, okay, bearing in mind it's income and expenses, and both are variable and both go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up again. It's not a smooth graph, so one has to interpolate a little bit, one has to eyeball it a little bit, but if one does that, it becomes pretty clear that sometime in the last year or two, we went past the knee of the national debt exponential. Okay? And by the looks of it, timing-wise, in all likelihood, President Trump's stimulus package, every penny of which was borrowed money, put us past the knee, but almost certainly President Biden's stimulus package of early 2021 did so. Sometime in that time frame is when it went past the knee. We are now past the knee of the exponential. And if you want to see the effect of that, just go to usdebtclock.org. That is usdebtclock.org, usdebtclock.org, usdebtclock.org. Go to the upper left-hand corner where the number for the United States national debt is. It's a slightly larger number. It's highlighted and clearly marked. You can't miss it. Just look at how quickly it is going up in real time in the meantime, and you can see where things are at. It's pretty much not recoverable anymore. Even the actual amount doesn't matter so much in that regard as the rate at which it is going up. But I'll address the amount briefly in just a moment as well. The point is that the knee happens toward the end of the process, okay? So we're not really far away anymore from the time when the national debt will go exponential, and when it does so, the United States national government will be bankrupt. Because once it's high enough, it'll be impossible to, literally mathematically impossible, actually for all practical purposes pretty much is already, but by then it'll be obvious that it's mathematically impossible to collect enough taxes to get ahead of it and stay ahead of it anymore, at which point the United States government will be bankrupt. There are only two ways of dealing with it. Either collect enough taxes to try to get ahead of it, okay, which in the meantime is impossible. It would take enough taxes to kill the economy to do that. Or the other choice is to just let it run until the national debt does go exponential, at which point it's obvious that it can't be paid off anymore. Okay, and so the realization hits that the government is bankrupt as a result, and all the implications of that will play out, will run their course. Okay, it's as simple as that. There's really no way around it anymore. It's only a matter of time now, because we are past the knee of the exponential. And to be specific about it in terms of what's just happened recently, the U.S. national debt crossed $30 trillion on February 2nd, 2022. February 2nd of this year, as even officially acknowledged and reported by the Treasury Department of the United States government. Okay? And yes, the U.S. debt clock .org that I just talked about went just past $30 trillion on that day. I've checked the debt clock over the years because I saw this whole development coming, wanted to make sure, verify its accuracy, make sure it was accurate. Turned out to be all along the way. And then I got the confirmation there on February 2nd. I'm sure the government is not going by the online debt clock to come to these conclusions. I mean, they are the people who create the numbers in the first place. They have them all. They're doing their own calculations. The debt clock is certainly not official. The numbers from the Treasury Department are. They were doing their own calculations to come up with that number. But the point is the debt clock online matched what they were saying. Well, the debt clock online by a month later in early March was $300 billion higher. Okay? So, and it's going to continue at least that rate pretty much from now on, which means it's only a few more months before it'll be total at $31 trillion and $32 trillion and on from there. Okay? In other words, it's becoming pretty obvious that this thing is going up pretty quickly in the meantime. Okay? And it will continue to do so at an ever faster rate until two things happen. Well, strictly speaking, until one of them happens, the other is a consequence of it. Okay, but those things will basically be happening at the same time. Okay, one is that once it becomes obvious that the national debt is actually going exponential, going vertical, okay, and that therefore it is now impossible to pay it anymore because there's no way to collect enough taxes to do it anymore without killing the economy, the bond market will crash because it will become obvious that the bonds aren't worth as much as people thought they were because they can't be paid anymore in the long run. Okay? And the other consequence will be that once it becomes obvious to Wall Street that the situation I just described is going on, that it's gotten to the point where it's obvious that it can't be paid anymore and therefore the bonds aren't worth as much as everybody thought and the United States government is effectively bankrupt, I think Wall Street will panic too. It doesn't even have to go all the way exponential for that to happen. It just has to get to the point where it's obvious enough that Wall Street realizes that the private economy will also take a big hit once that happens. And so it's time to protect their profits and get out of the stock market because the stocks for the private companies won't do really well under those circumstances too. So I expect a major stock market panic at that point too when Wall Street fully realizes what is going on and tries to get their money out. Bearing in mind that once the national debt goes exponential, just for starters, not one single person who works for the federal government, either civilian or military, will be able to be paid anymore. But the government won't have any money for any of its other expenses anymore either. But the reason I mention the government pay is because so many people are dependent for their pay on the federal, so many people in the society are dependent on their pay from the federal government in the meantime, that when that goes away, that alone will create a big hit to the economy already, and I can assure you it won't be limited to that. Okay? It won't be a good situation, but that's what we're headed for. It's a mathematical certainty in the meantime, a mathematical reality. There's no mathematical way to get around this anymore, to get out from under. Okay? It will happen. The exponential is far enough along for that to be certainly, completely, unavoidably true. I myself am trying to take a positive approach. I've been aware of this coming for years already. I'm trying to set things up so some positive things can happen, but I am operating with the realization of what I've just been talking about, and I'm setting up to try to do things in the context of that, rather than trying to avoid it, which I don't think will be useful or helpful. But we'll see how well that'll work. We'll see how successful I can be with that. In other words, I'm trying to set up to create something very positive out of what will likely be a very negative situation. We'll see how well it'll work. In all likelihood, it'll have to be fairly alternative things because the conventional system as it exists now will not hold up under the circumstances that I'm talking about. That is effectively impossible. It's mathematically unsustainable. It's mathematically impossible for that to happen. So it won't. Okay? We'll just have to see how well things go under those circumstances and how people in general react to the situation when the time comes, how most people will react to it. I have a feeling overall the reaction won't be very good, but we'll see. I'm doing my best to try to do something about it. We'll see how well that works. We'll see how it goes.